Cool. Welcome to tonight's lecture. Heard me talk a little bit about, not really, didn't talk much about it, but talked about the difficulty of tonight's lecture. Uh, there is not a whole ton of content for the lecture. It's just one concept that can take a while to fully understand. This is the kind of lecture that we really implemented TK Prep for, because this is one of those things that the more exposure you have to this concept, the more you're going to understand it and start to get it. This is not something that anyone is going to get first try. It's a difficult one, right? So understand that as we go through this stuff, you're not going to get this first try. Those of you that have already done TK Prep are probably like, well, yeah, I didn't get it first try. This is really hard. Those of you that didn't, this is your first try, your first attempt at it. It's difficult, and so we're going to try to break it down piece by piece tonight, so that you can get a full understanding of it. A fair disclaimer here: this higher order concepts are not going to be on your sprint challenge. You're not usually expected to build your own higher order components. You will eventually in the professional setting, but it's not something that you do every day. Okay, and so the goal of this lecture and this lesson is to get you to understand what's happening. Building your own higher order components is not something we do all the time. Using higher order components is something we do every single day as professional developers. So that's why we want you to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And so because we use it all the time, when we get to Redux, you're going to see we use higher order components all over the place. With our new kind of version of React where we're going with React, higher order components are used even more than they have been in the past. It is a design pattern in React that really works well for what we need it to do. It allows us to create these components, reusable components, all over the place, and we can really make our code ultra dry when we use HOCs. So that being said, before we get into it, in the past, we have worked with higher order functions. Who can tell me a place where we have used a higher order function and what a higher order function is? We've used higher order functions with arrays, but I want a little more specificity on that one. Okay, yep, map, right? Map is considered a higher order function. And Steve got that one. Function, a higher order function is a function that takes another function as an argument. Okay, so anything that takes a callback as an argument, we can call an HOF, right? Higher order function. Map, reduce, filter, for each, any of that stuff. Even more specifically, is a function that returns another function as well. And so we can get a function that takes a function and then returns another function to us, right? That would be like a ultimate higher order function. And we're used to this pattern, right? We've used it before. We've used it throughout not our entire time at Lambda, but since your JavaScript sprint, okay? And so what is a higher order component when we get to React? Very simply, very, very, very simply. Yeah, true, Steve. Yep. But more specifically than that. We'll get a couple more people to answer. Okay, higher order component is a component that takes another component as an argument. All right. It's a component that brings in another component, and then what does it do to it? Each has their own state. Yep. It returns a new component, so that is the component bringing in another component. And what I'm mostly looking for is a higher order component extends the functionality of a component as is. Okay, it is going to allow us to extend the functionality of a component, so we can add state to it, we can add props to it, we can add click handlers, things like that. When we use a higher order component. Boop, boop, boop. Let me get my notes up. Let's go build one. And those of you that have done the TK prep, you are going to be familiar with what we're building, but I want to walk through it and talk about it while we build it. Okay, let me share my screen, move some stuff around. All right, so we are going to build a really quick higher order component. Okay, so let's just build it all in line here. We have our app, we have our just plain old regular functional component app here. I'm going to come in here below this, and I'm also going to share this with you. Follow along with, and I'm going to build some components for us. All right. So what if I do something like I'm going to create a button? So let's go const button, and we're going to make this a, what kind of component is this? This is a functional component, right? I didn't say function here, right? But this, we know that this is a function, right? So this is a functional component. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to return a button. We're just going to say click me. Okay. So now we can go into our app and we can put this component in our app. And now you'll see that we have a button there. Doesn't quite do anything yet. Okay. Let's now create a higher order component. So we are going to create a functional higher order component that is going to we're going to call it higher order component. Going to take in an argument. And what it's going to do here is it's going to return a class component. Okay. So we can say HOC if we want. We don't have to name it right here, but you can give it a name if it makes you more comfortable. I'm going to call it HOC. And then what we're going to do is we are going to extend react.component. Okay, so this, what is this right here when I build this? What is higher order component? In the most basic way, most basic thing, it is simply a function, right? That is all it is. It is a function, and what does it return? And more specifically, it returns a class component, right? So it's just a function. So if I were to come in here and say, it's going to break right now. So we're going to put a render, boop, 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 and we're going to return, and say, we'll say this is an H2, we'll say HOC. How would I get this to render on my screen right now. As is. I just want to get this H2 HOC to render on my screen right now. Put it in an app. Okay, how do I do that? Okay, let's try it. We're gonna get a break, right? Higher order component is not defined. Okay, so I can do H higher order component like that. It's not gonna do anything. We're gonna get a console error. It's unrecognized. If you meant to render a React component, blah blah blah. I can try this, right? But let's think about what we're doing here. What is React doing when it sees this JSX like this? It's trying to do one of two things. It is trying to either call the render method on that component, or it is trying to return some JSX to us. So what we need to do is we need to remember this is just a function, right? Higher order component at this point is just a function. We can come in here. Remember, if we want to write JavaScript within our JSX, we can just write those curly brackets and call this function. Should save that. Let's come in here. We'll do this. Const HOC equals, and we'll just call it here. We need to call the function first, right? And then we can come in here and go HOC like that. And now we're getting that to our screen, okay? So now we have called that function. What does this function return to us? It returns a class component to us, right? And we can call this whatever we want. We don't have to call it HOC. We can call this big HOC header if we want to. And we can use that there. We can call that whatever we want, right? There we go. And so now we have built a function that returns a class component to us. Does anyone have any questions on this right now? What we've done here? We're not dealing with the button yet. Rowan's, can you maybe clarify, like, what do you mean, which variable? Are you just talking about this one? So we need to create this variable because we need a place to, we need something to call on higher order component, all right? Or to put in our JSX here. So yes, we'll need to create that variable at the beginning. Mostly why? You'll find out why soon, Douglas. There's a way to get it to work. I had it in my notes. It didn't work right there. I went with the default way. This is the way you're supposed to do it right here. Sorry about that. Sorry for leading you astray at the moment. You'll find too, as we go through this, that there, and I'll show you two different ways to create higher order components. But these are design patterns. Okay, yeah, Paul, right there is where it's defined. These are design patterns. So a step back for a moment. A design pattern is a technique, a way of doing something. This is not necessarily specific to React. This is not necessarily built into React. This is using JavaScript to do something that we want it to do in React. Okay, that's the beauty of React, is that it's all just JavaScript, so we can create a function that returns, use it like that, right? This is a design pattern. This is not necessarily an opinionated way of doing something. This is not a React way of doing something, right? I want to keep that clear. There are tons of different design patterns. We'll see some more next week when we get into router, and we'll talk about render props. But higher order component is probably one of the more highly used ones. Okay, so now that we are returning a class component, what can we put on this class component? Also, do we need a class component right here? Can I just say return function HOC? Can I do this? Yeah, it totally works, right? I can use this to return a functional component. It's fine. It works. Absolutely. That might look a little funky to you to have two return statements in a row like that, but realize this is higher order component is a function that is returning another function, which then itself returns something. But we get most of our functionality, no pun intended, out of returning class components. Why is that? Yeah, state, right? We can use state on this. So in this case, I'm going to build our constructor. Remember, per our last lecture, you don't need to use a constructor anymore, but I like to, just so I know what's going on. And now I can say state. And if you're following along, this is essentially the same thing we're doing in the training kit exercise, but we're going to give it a count. And we're going to start that count at 0, okay? So now our higher order component is returning a class. And like I said, you don't even need that name to it. We just gave it a name because it's familiar to us. It's returning a class that has state to it now. And now we can say something like state.count, right? And we get that, okay? So let's now create something that increments that count. So we're going to just call it increment count. It is a method on our class that will increment our count by 1. How do I increment this count by 1? Ooh. Douglas, if we do that, then our React is never going to know that we updated our state. We have to use this state, .set state. Remember, we have to use set state. Okay. We have to use set state. And in this case, could we do this? Oh, not that. We do that. I will say I'm not going to be as hardline as Dustin here with your very bold no. You could do this, okay? This is probably going to work, remember? But we want to, if we're going to update our state using our state, we want to use the previous state and a callback. This is how we can go like this. Okay, a new little pattern here, and we're going to talk about some new patterns as we go. If you ever see something like this, this is an implicit return, all right? An implicit return means that we are now allowed to return something if it's only a single line function. But if our JavaScript sees a curly bracket, it's going to think that it's a function. So we can wrap that in parentheses and it will return that. Or we can simply do this. I just wanted to show you that when you see that other way out there, I don't know, can anyone else hear me? Okay. When you see that other way out there, that's what it's doing. Okay, that's an implicit return, and you're wrapping that object in parentheses so it doesn't think that it's an actual function block. Okay, so this increment count now is going to increment our count. So let's just do this. Let's create a click on click that takes increment count, and it's working for us, right? Oop, it was. Why isn't it? There it goes. Oh, it's just lagging a little behind there. Okay, so now it's incrementing our count. Any questions about that? Essentially, we have created a function that returns a new component, and none of this stuff in this new component should be any different for you, right? This is all the stuff we've been going over, right? Is there, like, honestly, right now, is there any confusion on what we're doing here other than this part and how we're rendering that to the screen? All right, I want everyone to remember that you understand this and that what's going on here. You understand what's going on here, right? If you don't understand what's going on here, I'd love to take this minute to address that right now, because we're going to move on and things are going to look tricky, but they're not really tricky. They're just what we have here. Okay, cool. Yeah, for sure. So I don't even want to talk about this yet. I want to talk about this component, right? All we're doing is rendering a class component that has some state, and it's returning in its render, it's returning some JSX, right? We have a click, and we are on click, we are calling this method. We are rendering some state to our view here. So our whatever we have there, that's our current state, right? And then when we click on it, it's setting our state to be one more than what the state currently is. Okay, that's all it's doing here. This is it. That's all we got going on. We know how to create a class component. Cool. Just a regular old component inside of a function. That's exactly it. Now, where higher order components come from. So, is that we're going to now pass a component, a previous already written component, into this function as its only parameter, okay? So we're going to call this wrapped component. That's it, right? What is this right here? Just in the simplest terms, what do I have highlighted there? A parameter argument. You can call it an argument. It's a parameter, right? This is a plain old. This function has nothing to do with React, right? This has something to do with React because we're talking about React components here. But this is just a regular old JavaScript function, and this is a regular old JavaScript function parameter argument, if you want to call it an argument. It's pretty interchangeable. But yeah, it's just an argument parameter, right? It's all it is, okay? We know for a fact we have promised ourselves that this is going to be a React component. So we'll just say wrapped component will always be a React component. Can this, I'll just say, is a functional component a React component? Ooh, I like the... A functional component is a React component. It's a valid React component. A class component is a valid React component. It doesn't matter what type it is, okay? It could be functional or class, but it's going to be a React component. No hate for functional components, but yeah, it's going to always be a React component. It doesn't matter what type it is, but it will be a component. So now that we have this, we know with the rules of closure that we can use this inside of our new class, right? We can use this inside of our new class here. So what if I came in here and I said, I'm going to take this out just for a moment. And I just said wrapped component. Don't have anything in there yet. But what would be, let's do this. Never mind that error yet. What's weird about this right here? Is there anything, I'll get rid of that and I'll add one of those. Okay. Is there anything crazy about this concept here? We can pass this a component and it will render it to the screen, right? Any questions about this right now? Just assume a wrapped component is a React component. No questions? Everyone's like totally on board with this? Oh, imagine we're doing this. Import wrapped component from whatever. Why would you return the argument? I'll show you in a moment, Justin, but we're going to take baby steps to get there. So imagine this. Instead of this being an argument, we don't even see that part. We just see that. Would that be confusing to you if you saw that, other than that path isn't real? No, it's not. This is how we do things, right? We import components and we render those components inside of our other component. It's what we do in React. It's straightforward. That's what we do. Now imagine instead of that, we could import dynamically any component we wanted to, all right, through a function. So in this case, I'm going to do something else, and I'm going to const HLC header equals props. And I'm just going to return before that. All this HLC header does right now is returns our the H2, right? So if I did something like this, we should just see our HLC header there, right? Does that make sense? All right, still? Okay, this is a very simple functional component. So what if I did this now? All right, I simply passed this component into that function. That's all I did. This function now takes this, so now a wrapped component for this version of calling it, wrapped component is now HOC header. We're going to return a class component that essentially is going to render the wrapped component, whatever that is, to the screen. All right. Let me go in here and go. And we shouldn't see any difference right here. Okay. Save that. Now, are there any questions on this right now? Brandy, no, I didn't mean to confuse you in that way. It's not the same as importing. I just wanted to show that's essentially what it's going to feel like. Okay. The unclick doesn't work right now because we're just rendering the component to the screen. I wanted to bring that analogy in. It's more of an analogy than actually what's happening. But we can think of it like that because you would do that and then just render that component to the screen, right? We're just not naming that component. And it could be anything we want it to be. So now what if I did this? I passed our button into that function now. All right. And our button is now being rendered inside of this higher order component. All right. So now I'm going to say, instead of just our regular old button, I'm going to say HOC button. And it shouldn't see any difference here. No change yet. Okay. Now, are there any questions on this? So now, when this gets called, HOC header is the wrapped component. When this one's called, button is the wrapped component. Does that make sense? Sure. Let's do it. We're going to come in here. Let's just go straight from the beginning. This is our index.js, right? App gets called, boom, like there. It gets rendered to the screen. App gets called. The first thing that happens is that we are assigning a variable to whatever this returns, right? So we're going to look at this function, higher order component, and we have passed in this component. Okay, cool. All right, we know what a component is. We see that here. It's a functional component. We've passed that in as its only argument. Let's go check out that function. That function has a parameter, which in this case is going to be HOC header, that component, and it's going to return to us a React component. That's all it is. It has some state on it, and it has an increment count. We're not even using the state or increment count yet. We don't even need this yet. Okay. All it's doing in this component is just rendering a div with whatever component we pass to it inside of it. That's it. And if we do something like this, let's just do this. Inside, let's go inside HOC. Okay, and now let's do this. We'll come in here, and look, we have that div inside HOC wrapping whatever component we gave to it. Now look at this. We have two inside HOC and that button inside HOC and that component or that header, right? So let's just say that our higher order component here, all it does is wraps our component in a div with a class name on it. What would that be useful for? Like, this is super useful right now, right? Yeah, we can take a button, say, and we can wrap it in a class that has some styling for it. We can take, any of this stuff. So I can come in here, if I wanted to, I can go into styles and I can say inside HOC, and I can just say like font size is 22 pixels. It should work. Where's it going on? Let's do something crazy. 36 pixels. Okay, look at that. Now, it should have done both of them. I don't know why I didn't. Button maybe doesn't take a font size from a parent. Something like that. So we can, give it every single one of these, whatever's inside there, a font size. Button apparently doesn't take font size from a parent. So, yeah, this is already useful for us. So we get that one returns this. So now big HOC header is going to be this class returning this. Okay? See our button passed in this class returning this with button here instead of the header. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? So this is now equal to this class, right? Big HOC header is now equal to this class, and we can render it just like we would any other component. Cool. All right, let's link it up. Let's do big things with this now. Now we're going to start doing some big things. So, and now imagine we have this. We have this extra stuff here. We didn't need it before. We're going to use it now. And we call this component and we throw a prop down to it. We all know how props work. Just because we're not using the specific name of the component here does not mean that this is not the HOC header, right? Does not mean that it's not that component. It is that component. Just because we're not using this specific name, we can pass a prop to any component we want, right? So I'm going to say this dot state. So we're now passing a prop to this dot state. Does this have a prop on it called count? Does this have a prop on it called count? Yeah, they both do. Let's check it out. Let's go to React. Oh, that's Redux. Oops. Okay, let's go look. Let's do a button. Look, props has a count prop, or button has a count prop on it. The HOC header has a count prop on it. Pretty cool, huh? So now we have just added those props. Are we using those props yet? No, we're not using them yet. We can, though. Let's go do it. In this component, we're now going to say props.count. What's going on here? Why is it screaming at us? Oh, Matt. Now look, we're now using that prop in here, just like we would use a prop anywhere else. Okay, we can use that prop in here now. Any questions on that? No questions? All right, we're going to go one step further. We're going to add another prop to this. We're going to call it click handler. Can I call this prop anything I want? Yeah, we can, right? As long as we know what it's called in here. And I'm going to add that specific increment count to it. And now in here I can say, and how would I call that now? Yep. I'm going to say, I was going to do it wrong until you told me. I was going to say increment count. But props.clickHandler, right? Because that's the name of the prop. So when I click this, is that going to increment that count? Oh, it did it. It is, right? Look at that. Now it works. This is a regular old functional component, but now it has state. Think about that. We have now extended the functionality of this component to have some state, to have a click handler. All it is a closure, Douglas. That's all it is. It really is. It's cool. This is a component that we have enhanced. Okay, the higher order component function here enhanced this component and gave it some state. All right, we can do the same with button. All right, moment of truth here. This is a big one. When I click button, I'm going to do a poll real quick. Poll real quick. Hold on 1 second. Boom, boom, boom. I want to know. And anonymous, send a channel, 5-minute timer. When we come back, we'll find the answer. Also, if you have any questions while we're at break, put them in Slack. All right, everyone, come on back. Oop, no more beeping. All right, let's find out. So, majority of us said that the button number is going to update only. Nobody said the header number was going to update. 6 of you said the button and the header would update. And then 6 of you also said nothing's going to happen. Let's see. I don't think nothing's going to happen, but maybe. So click the button, and our button number updates only. Who can tell me why our button number updated only? Was the only one that updated. Anyone have any ideas? Separate state, but why? I think Rain's got the best answer so far, because it's a totally different component. So Rain and Will, I think you were both on the right tracks. Brandy, these are 2 different components, right? Every time we call that function, it creates a brand new component for us. Okay, this is not the same component. These are not the same components. Okay, these are 2 completely different components. Yeah, they've both got these increment count methods. Yeah, they've both got a count on state, but every time we call this function, it builds and creates a brand new component. Does that make sense to you? So we can call this higher order component function 30 times, and it's going to create 30 completely different components. No, you can call this whatever you want. I called it wrap component right here. You can just call it like comp if you want, or something. Just like any function signature, you can call that whatever you want. So yeah, these are totally different states they're on, right? This is a different component than this. They both, have the same stuff in their state, but they're different states. They're different. They're even different as far as memory goes. They're different methods here. They're different methods here. They're completely different classes. They're not the same thing at all. Okay, so it's really important to understand that they have their own state. So now we come in here. We can look at button has a count of 0, and when I click it, well, we should do this actually. There's its own state, right? This is the higher order component. Okay. And now we see the counts at 1. That count is still at 0 because it is a totally different class. Okay. So they have their own state. So what we have essentially have done here is we have given state, we have given functionality to these functional components. Like I said, you can use a class component here. Doesn't matter if it's functional or class. It's the same, right? They're just components that we're rendering and we're passing some props to. Exactly, Luis. They look the same, but they're 2 totally different cookies. They look the same, but they've got like a different filling, right? So say you use the cookie cutter and you gave it peanut butter one time and like cherry jam the next time. They look the same. They're 2 different cookies and they got different filling in them. Boom. Great question, Aaron. Can I just put on click here? If I put on click here, what are we? Increment count. What happens here is, since this is a component and not a JSX tag, okay, this is going to be a prop, just like Will said right there. This is going to be a prop on both of these, okay? It has to be a JSX tag in order to use onClick as an event. Cool. So that's going to be something that you're going to run into. 95% of you are probably going to do that in the future, where you add that. Yeah, you could put that on click right here, right? We can do that. You could absolutely do that. Hey, let's do that instead, and then we'll take that click handler off. That totally works. And then we don't have to worry about it right here. We can just use that to display. Okay, you're not going to see any difference. But yeah, that totally works, right? We put the on click on that div wrapping it, and we're just displaying the count. That's a great question. So yeah, don't fall into the trap of putting an event on a component, like as a prop, because it's just going to be a prop. You'd have to come in here and then say props dot on click if you wanted it to work. Every div, well, I mean, in this case, right? Yeah, if you didn't want, that's also a great thing to bring up, Justin. If you didn't want the increment count to be on your component for some reason, in some way, that would probably not be the best place to put it, right? So I could say if I wanted to use it, I could in this way, right? And then we wouldn't have to always use it every time. And that's a great way of extending the functionality even more. It's like maybe we don't want that component to be clickable. We just want it to display something. In this case, displaying was just hard code 0 into it, right? But there might be a certain instance where you don't want to use one of the props or piece of the state. Awesome questions and good observations. All right. Any questions now regarding this? Any other questions? Okay, we have built a higher order component function. That function, let's walk through it. This is just a function. It is going to take a React component as an argument. Okay. It is going to return a class, a React class component is what it's going to return. Brand new, every time it gets called, it's going to create and return a brand new class component. It's going to have its own state. It's going to have its own methods. And what it's going to do is it's going to extend some functionality to that component that was passed into it. We're going to wrap it. We're going to extend some functionality to it. And there we go. Once we want to use those, we're going to call that function and we're going to pass it a normal React component. Okay. Thinking really crazy and outside the box here. Can I pass this potentially, could I pass it another higher order component? Totally, right? I could do that. It's going to be a lot more difficult. We're going to have to finagle some other stuff in there, but yeah, you can pass it another higher component because this is just a function as this is just a function, right? That's just a function. I can pass it another function that takes another function, etc. Okay, which is something you will see in more advanced stuff. But for now, we're just going to pass it a regular old functional component, and it's going to give us back a class component that we can render to the screen. All right, that has some extended functionality to it. In both of these cases, they both have their own state, and they're both two different classes rendered to the screen. Any questions regarding this right now? This is higher order components. We have created a higher order component. The mystery is gone. Okay. Great question, Kurt. What if the component being passed in already has its own state? So let's do this. That's a great. I'm going to actually use that as a segue into this right now. So we're going to say instead of const we're going to say class. And let's go extends React.component. And then we'll say constructor. And let's just go title. And we'll say the title is click me. Render. And let's get rid of that. Let's move that up. We're going to say this dot props dot count, and let's use our state here. So check it out. We have a class component that has its own state that's returning a button that's rendering the title from the state and then whatever's given to us from our props. Okay. And right here, that's what it's doing there. We are using, remember, this is wrapping a component. So this is wrapping a class component and it's passing it these props. Does that make sense now? And there's one more thing. There's one more question I'm waiting for someone to ask about this. If they both had a state of count, that's fine. Because they're two different things. We're using the state or the props on this component. Okay, so I can say, let's go. Now we have both the state and the props on there. All right, this is getting a little contrived and but this is something that we got to know the difference between state and props in order to really understand this, right? So it's using its own state in this component. We are just rendering a component and passing some props to it. That's all it's doing. Does that make sense? Can it access the state of the passing component? Sean, no, it cannot. Just like our app cannot access the state of these. So no. Good question, though. Think of the higher order component as just app. That's just returning some wrap stuff. Look, this doesn't confuse us, right? We understand what's going on here. Same exact thing is happening right here, except we don't know the name of wrapped component. We have given it a generic variable name. It's the same exact thing that's happening. Just a pattern that we use. See some typing, so I'll wait for a moment. Rain, I'm assuming that's coming from a C# or Java background, and I'm not 100% sure on the answer to that. Yeah, Brandy, wrapped component is just like a placeholder for whatever component we pass into it. Totally. Yep. Just like any other function. It's like if I created a function that said, say my name, and it said name was the function parameter, and I could make name whatever I want to. I don't really want to draw parallels to a true object-oriented language, Rain and Yassine. So there might be similar, but they're not going to be the same thing. But I would say they're fairly similar. But this is just a pattern, whereas that's like an integral part of the language. Okay. So the one question I haven't gotten is what happens when there are other props that we want to pass to this button, right? What if we want to pass props into here? We want to say like color or something, and we want to pass Roger Blue in. And you expect to get a color prop on here. Right? We don't have that color on there yet. How do we get that into here? Does anyone know? Will it only be available within higher order function? Currently, yeah. Right? Remember, this is not this yet. This is this. Okay? It has its own set of props. So we can take all of the props we pass to this, and we can say maybe even we'll go color is this dot props dot color. And look, there it works. Okay. We can also do this. Ruins, that's because that's just has to deal with style, the style part of React requires you to pass it an object. That's it. Okay. So if you want to look up more, look up style in React. So we can do this as well. What that's going to do, and you'll see this used very often, this is going to pass all of the props down to that component. Okay? So we can pick and choose, or we can just pass all the props. And you'll see this way with higher order components, you'll see this way used way more often. Because the higher order component shouldn't care about it. Could care about the props because we could use it in the higher order component. But if you want to just pass all the props to a component, you can just spread them inside of curly brackets like that, and that goes for everything. This works everywhere throughout React, and it will pass all of the props. All right. There was some pretty advanced stuff in there at the end, especially that passing prop stuff. But I want to move on to some other instances of higher order components, unless anyone has any questions right now regarding this. I've saved it. I'll share it with you. Questions? All right, no typing. We're going to move on. Let's go to Code Sandbox again. We're going to start a whole new sandbox. Create React, because that's what we like. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 new files. I'm going to say first component. Yes, I'm actually going to create 3 new files. I just call it that because I'm tired of using higher order component as the name of things, because we can give these things names. We don't have to just call it higher order component. That is what it is called, but we don't have to call it that. So let's come in here and let's nuke that. And let's go, which one should render? Okay. That's all it is. I'm going to create some Net export default function. Call it first. With some props. And what we're going to do is we're just going to return H1. This is the first component. Save that. Did I share this one with you yet? I did not. We'll come back into here, and we are going to say import first component from first component. And we'll render that to the screen. All right, so now we have, this is the first component. Perfect. That is being rendered to the screen right now, just like we thought it would. Let's come into second component, and I'm going to copy paste so you don't have to watch me type. And we'll go second. This is the second component. Come in here. Oop, the shortcut doesn't work in Code Sandbox. Okay, so we have two components rendering to the screen right now, and I'm going to create a button that says toggle components. All right. I'm going to change this to a class. Give me 1 second. Which, and we'll do 0, we'll do 1, actually, that's fine. All right, so this component has a class. It's a class component. App is, it has some state, and it's a switch. Is the thing on state, and it's either going to be 1, let's do 0 or 1. We are going to create a toggle method that is simply going to, if the state is 0, it's going to make it 1. If it's 1, it's going to make it 0. So we're going to this.set state. We're going to use previous state because we are using the state. And we're going to return, let's go. Let's say if previous state equals 0. There's other ways and simpler ways of doing this, but this is pretty out in the open. Previous state, yes, thank you. Previous state dot which. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. So let's come and look at this. Open our React Dev Tools. We're going to look at app. We're going to say state. Oh, we haven't added it to our button yet. Okay. On click this dot toggle. Reload it. All right, we see our state right here, which is 0. It's either 1 or 0, right? It's just toggling it on or off, 1 or 0. That's it. Okay, so let's think about this. We want to create a higher order component that is going to take in both of these components, and it is going to render one to the screen. All right, that's all it's going to do. It's going to render one of them to the screen. Let's go build that out. We need to import React because we're creating a higher order component. And now, how do I start building my higher order component? How do I start doing this? I have const and class. Constant class. Create a functional component. What we're going to do is we are going to create a function. So I'm going to say export default, and I'm going to build a function. All right. And I'm going to call it which should render. And what this function is going to take, and this is kind of a tricky thing here, is this is going to take a component. And let's call this component 1. Now, this is going to be a weird thing. We're going to get a little bit different in this. When we want a higher order component that takes multiple components, we're going to pass them in one at a time. Okay? So this higher order component, which should render, is going to return another function. All right? This is strange. We don't have to call that anything. It's going to take in component 2. All right. I mean, let's do it this way, and then I'll show you how to format it. You're going to see it this way most of the time. That's fine. We'll just do both of them at the first. Okay? Instead of that, and instead of that. We don't need those. We don't need that. Function. All right, we're going to give them both at one time, and then later on, I'm going to show you how to do them separately. Can you pass in an array of components? Yeah, you can do whatever you want, right? This is a function. We can do this however we want to do it, however we want to pass those components into it. Okay, so now that we have our 2 components, do whatever you want. Maybe not, but no magic here. Great question, James, because higher order component really isn't a component, right? It becomes a component when we call this function. That's a good question. It's more of an issue of semantics. So when we call this function, whatever variable we assign to what this returns is going to be capitalized. Okay? I'll point that out in just a minute. Okay, so now that we have this, what are we going to return? Gregory, nothing. There's no difference between if you mean this or this. Is that what you mean? There's no difference between the 2 of those. We'll do it this way. That's fine. We're going to return a class, right? And we can name this class if we want. I'm going to choose not to name it, but we need to make sure that it's a class component, right? It is going to extend React component. We are going to return a brand new class. Inside of this, we can give it some state. We can give it a constructor. And we're going to give it a title, the state, and we'll say welcome to component juggler. All right. So now we have this class. Okay, if we call which should render and we put it on the screen, it's going to do nothing for us, right? Because it's not rendering anything. If we do this, and we say this dot state dot title, it is going to render welcome to component juggler for us, right? The component juggling app, that's what it does. Okay, so, and this directly is going to correlate with your project tonight. How do we do it to where if our props that we're getting is 0, we render component 1, or if it's 2 or 1, let's change that up. I don't like that. Let's do 1. So we can not have to worry about what that means. So if it's 1, we render component 1. If it's 2, we render component 2. Sure, we can use a ternary, right? And how will we write this ternary? Help me out. It's the first thing I should check. What my ternary is checking. I like it. I like what Rain had put down there. This dot props dot which equals, oops, 1. Okay. If it equals 1, then what should I do? Component 1. Just like a normal ternary. Otherwise, component 2, right? All right, let's go make this work. Okay. So first thing we need to do, what do we need to do in order to use that higher order function? We need to import it. Love it. And we're going to say which should render from which should render. Okay, we've got it. Now what do we do? Say call Cassia, but how? Where are we going to put this at? Set it to a variable. And I'm going to show you this. Where would you set it to a variable at? Create a constant in the render. So we can do that in the render. But what's going to happen if we do that in the render? It's going to call that function. Yeah, it's not gonna loop. I wouldn't worry about it looping because we're not calling set state in it, but it's going to call that function every time we get a re-render. We don't really want to do that. Oh yeah, there we go. It would have gone to 1 if we didn't do it, but yeah. We don't really want to call that function every time there's a re-render. We only want to call it once. So I'm going to do it outside of the component itself, right? We have all of the information we need outside of this. And then we'll say, we're going to call it juggler. All right, so now is where I create that uppercase component. Okay, and now I'm going to call which should render And what am I going to pass into which should render? Yeah, I'll pass first component, and then I'll pass second component into it. So I've created a new component here, right? I've created a new component by calling this function. This function comes in and creates a brand new class component for us. So that's why we don't write the function as an uppercase, but when we create the component, we write it as an uppercase. Does that make sense? Because this is technically not a component. This is technically a function, whereas this is definitely a component. Any questions on creating this component right now? Yep. We'll come and look at this in a minute. So one last thing we're going to do, and I'm not sure what you wanted from this, Jordan. If you have a question on it. Aaron, we cannot do that right now. I'll show you a way you can do it in the future, but you can't do it right now. This is the way we're going to do it. We're going to create that component outside here because we don't need any of this state yet, right? So I'm going to delete both of these. And now I link this new higher order component. This is the higher order component now, it's Juggler. How do I link that up with our app? Yep. So I'm going to create it just like this, right? But we know that Juggler is going to want a prop, okay? And so we're going to give it its prop as well. Ooh, now we have welcome to component Juggler. This is our first component. If I click here, Juggler. This is the second. Look at that. Now we are flopping back and forth just based on what we've got here. Okay. So this is kind of important. We can do a lot of functionality. There ain't no magic. We built this from scratch. You saw me build the code sandbox directly from scratch. All right. No magic here. Okay. If I created another component, another and instead of first, I passed in another. Look at that. Now we have done nothing but given our higher order component a new component. Okay, so imagine the things you can do with higher order components. I created the multi-billion-dollar startup idea component Juggler with it. Can you put in all three? Sure. What do you think would happen if I put in all three? Well, it's going to juggle the first two because it doesn't care about the third one, right? It doesn't even know a third one exists in there. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. It's a function. Whatever you can normally do in a function, you can do here, I should say. Not whatever you want. What if I told you there was an app that juggled components for you? But yeah, all right. So we now can pass whatever components we want into here. So what your job is going to be tonight to do is to create an authentication system where you only render something to the screen if a user's logged in, and you don't if they're not logged in. Can you think of any other uses for this type of higher order component out there? Any ideas? User levels? Yeah. So what if you had a like an admin account versus a user account, and you only wanted to display certain things on your page if that user was an admin, right? Boom, higher order component. Um, yeah, app with manager and employee having different permissions, search tags, so many different things we could use for this, right? And that's just this juggler thing, right? We can think of there's hundreds and thousands of different ways. Location specific suggestions, perfect. Hide stuff from people you've blocked. Yeah, if you've blocked someone, you want to hide it. You should do that on the server. But yeah, filtering is a perfect one. What if you had all of your stuff in a higher order component and you only rendered the things that you had filtered out for? Beautiful. Yeah, so there's so many different ways we can use this. This is just a really simple way right here. Tabs would be great. It would be a great to set up a tab system using higher order components. Um, yeah, that would be awesome, right? Where you have the tab specifically and you just have whatever's rendered. And essentially just like this. What if instead of toggle components, these were just tabs that said 1, 2, whatever, however many, and we can just click those and they would toggle them. Collecting user specific data to sell. That's what everyone's on the internet for, right? Yes. No. Um, but yeah, so you can think of a lot of different ways of doing this. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we'll look into a couple other little nuances. Yeah, I did save it. It should be saved right there. Look, some nuances of higher order components, and then we'll get you started with your higher order component project tonight. Oh, I lost. Oh, there it is. All right, reset it. See you in 5. All right, everyone, come on back. We're going to continue on. And I mean, essentially, this is the bulk of what we've got going on, right? We can create a higher order component. We can get it to do stuff, right? This is not extending any functionality now, right? This is a completely different kind of higher order component. It's not extending any functionality. It's merely rendering something conditionally, right? So we can create these kind of higher order components. It's important to understand that the term higher order component is pretty generic. It doesn't necessarily mean one thing or another. All it means is that it takes a React component in and it returns a React component. That's all it means. So, in the case of our little counter here, it took a React component in and it gave it some extended functionality, gave it some state and some click handler. In this case, it took two components in and it rendered them conditionally. Okay, so the only thing a higher order component has to do is return a component and take a component in. All right. So I'm going to show you how this is going to look in the real world. You are most likely not going to see a higher order component that takes more than one component at a time. You are going to see something like this, and it is going to return a function. And let's go down to the bottom here. And this should be prettier on this. There we go. So what this is going to do now is it's a higher order component that takes one component in and it returns a function. Okay, so that function is going to take a second component and that is going to return our class. So in this case, how we would call this, how would we call this? We can use it. It's the same thing. It's the same functionality, but how would we create Juggler out of this? Anyone have any ideas? Almost, Dustin. It's a great answer. Almost. Not quite yet. So we'll break it down. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Is it Iner or Einer? But yeah, you're right. Okay. So this is what we're going to do. I don't normally write them that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this. So let's step through this. Which should render, and we call it one time. Okay. When we call it one time, what does that return to us? It returns another function, right? So this is another function. And if it's another function, we can call it. We can call that function now. And when we call that function, what does that function return to us? It returns, it doesn't return another function. It returns the class component to us, right? So you can see we can probably go down a rabbit hole if we wanted 3. And have 3, etc. We can keep going as long as we want it. Okay. Not recursion. It's just returning another function. We're not calling itself inside of the function. That's recursion. Inception, sure. Functionception, absolutely. But that's what you're going to see. And I'll show you the way you're going to see it is like this. We're going to call that. And here's ES6 way of doing this. Which is kind of crazy looking, but you're going to see this often. This is the way you're going to see it in ES6. And we'll get rid of that. Okay. So this is a function that returns another function that's then going to return this class. You will see it quite a bit if you go digging on the internet through React blogs. All right. Just know that when you see that pattern right there, that just means that this is returning another function. So that's just a function, right? That looks like a function to me. That's what it is. All right. You'll see it this way often, and it works the same as it did before. Okay. That's just some syntax, right? That's just some syntactical sugar that we're throwing onto it. But that allows us to do something like, what if we wanted to create the first part of the juggler over here, pass that down, and then create the second part of the juggler based on some other conditional thing somewhere else? We can do that, right? We don't have to start off with both of them instantly. So we can say juggler part 1 is that. And then we can say const juggler is juggler part 1 with the second part of it, right? So we don't have to give both of them right away. We can even like pass this down as a prop to something else and then have it finish it up somewhere else. You can juggle as many components as you want. I know this is getting a little confusing, but I just wanted to show you the extensibility of higher order components and why we would even break those up like that. You're like, well, why are we going to break them up if we just calling them right after another? We don't have to call them right after one another. We can call them much later on, okay, and add that second one later, and we can add that second one conditionally. Or we can create two jugglers. We'll just say we're going to go call this only half. And then we'll say juggler part only half. And then we'll go const another juggler. And only half is going to be, instead, we'll have first component. All right, so now we can come in here and put another juggler down. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Misstep. Of course. I'm just showing you the reusability of this stuff. All right, we got two jugglers now, and they both have different components to them. Okay? I'm just showing you can reuse this stuff, and that's why we separate those arguments up like that. Jugglerception. We don't put the jugglers inside of the jugglers, but we got the jugglers. Juggle? All right. So the only reason I show you that is because it shows you that we can reuse all of our code. We can go, I like that, Randy. We can go, we can make this as dry as possible, all right? Now, that being said, how often are you going to have to build code like this? Not very. It doesn't happen all the time. This is not something that a React developer regularly writes, but we're going to use stuff that's already written like this quite often. That's why it's really important to understand what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, so I want to also introduce us to another concept. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of our props. So we're going to go get rid of props on here. We're going to get rid of props on here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use local state. So can anyone tell me what local state is? Does anyone know what local state is? Persistent storage. I like that, Rain. That's a hard no. Excuse me, not local state, local storage. Excuse me. Local storage is something that exists in almost everyone's browser. Okay. Local storage exists in almost everyone's browsers. I like using MDN. We're going to go over this API web history stuff later, but I like using MDN. I also like showing you Facebook and Google because they also have a lot of local storage. So let's open up our console. Let's go to application. And you're going to see in here, you're going to have some storage stuff. You have your cookies. Everyone's heard of a cookie before. We'll use cookies when we get to backend. We have some databases that exist within our storage or within our browser. We have session storage. We can see that there's some session storage. And we also have local storage. So if we go into local storage, oh, Mozilla doesn't have it anymore. They used to have a little pop-up that you could hide. Local storage is unique to the URL. So by the URL, I mean the actual location here. So developer.mozilla.org has a unique local storage that is not accessible by any other website. Okay, so if you go to Google, you notice what was on the MDN site. Let's go to Google and our super basic Google page, right? We're going to go application, local storage, Google, and look what we got on Google. All right. Now, note that local storage is only accessible from google.com. This stuff is only accessible here. That's why you do not see that. Oh, I got to move this out of the way. That's why we don't see that here. Okay. Important note. No local storage here because Mozilla.org didn't put anything on our local storage. Google puts a lot of stuff on here. What does this mean? I don't know. You have to work at Google to understand what it means. They also have some other storage. Clients5.google, which is probably some tracking stuff. They also probably have a ton of cookies as well. But this really is useful when we want to persist information across multiple user sessions. So what happens is I can close my entire browser and this stays in there. What I could do is I could clear it personally if I wanted to, very easily. I don't really want to because I kind of want that information in there. But let's go to the console. Local storage is accessible using the local storage. Right? And there are 4 methods we should know on local storage. First is set item. The local storage set item is going to allow us to give it a name. So a key, essentially, it's going to be a string. So I'll just say my name. And the second item is what I want it to set it to. All right, so, okay, that seems fine. Let's go into our application. Now you'll see that there's a key called my name in local storage and a value of Daniel. All right, the next one we want to talk about is get item. And get item we can get by the key, okay? And we can get it. There it is, Daniel. Boom. We can also remove item. And then if I try to get it, wait, remove item. Oh, why did I say my name? My name. No. Okay. Let's set it back there again. So we still have it. And then we also have clear, which clears all of our local storage, everything that's on there. All right. So that's how we use local storage. We can use this within our application. Let's pop in here. And we're going to say, instead of toggle this way, what we're going to do is we're going to say let current index equal local storage dot get item, and we're going to call this index. If current index equals null, or if current index equals 2, we want to set that local storage to 1. Otherwise, we want to set that local storage to 2. So how do I set local storage? Why don't you walk me through it? I want to set this to 1. So if nothing is there yet, or if it's 2, I want to set it to 1. Thank you, Wilfred. I'm going to copy paste. Well, I'll write it out exactly as you wrote it. Storage dot set item index to 1. This is a good lesson here. So let me come in and we'll see if this is actually going to work. So local storage index set item 1. Let's go look at our local storage. You're going to notice that index is set to 1. But what we don't realize is that it's not set to the number 1. So I want to make sure that you understand this. It's not set to the number 1. It is set to a string of 1. Okay, local storage is always going to store your data as a string. All right. So there's some advanced stuff where you can use JSON.stringify if you want to store an object or an array. But for now, we're just going to store a string. So it's always going to store it as a string. Even if I give it to you a number, it is going to revert that to a string. Okay, so we can say 1. So let's come back in here and adjust our code. What we want to do is 1. All right. Otherwise, yes, it would be as long as it's a string. Okay, so triple equals checks for the type as well. And if it's a string of 2, it would not be exactly equals as 2 because it checks for type. All right. Otherwise, let's set it to 1 or to 2. In that case, we don't need our state here any longer, right? Let's save that. Let's come over to which should render. And now we want to get our local storage and check it. How are we going to do that? We could do it a number of ways. We could do it inside of the ternary directly, or I would do it up here. And I would say const index equals, and how are we going to get that back? Ooh. Combine both of yours, Jonathan and Wilfred. So we don't, when we're working in the browser, we don't have to say window anymore. We automatically know because window is our global. So just so you know, you can say window if you want, but you don't have to. Well, local storage dot get item. And we're going to say index. So now in our ternary, we can say index equals 1. Otherwise, it's not working. Let's see what's going on. Let's go open that in a new window. Well, we probably already have that open in a new window, but let's open that up. So we have it set to integer, not string in our components. Yeah, that's fine. It's not, I know exactly what's happening, and I'm trying to figure out a way around this without force re-rendering. So what is happening right here? Does anyone see what's happening? And why this isn't re-rendering? It's working. We can come in here. I'm going to close that. And we can go into our application. And we can see it's working, but it's not re-rendering. Not updating the state. And I have an example where it does update the state. That's going to use a location.reload. Okay, that's fine. We'll do that. This is a little hacky, but now it should work. No, I don't necessarily want it to reload like that. I'll come up with a better way of doing that. We don't want it to re-render like that, but I just wanted to show you how to use local storage. So in this case, in your Instagram thing or your project, you might have a user, right there, username and password, and they click a button and it signs up. And what that does is that'll send not in your Instagram clone tonight, but in real life, that'll send a request to a server. That server comes back and says, yep, that's the right user. You then update local storage that say like user is signed in, and you turn it to a new route, right? And then it reads that local storage and it sets it up for you. So you can see how you can use local storage. If I close this window out, and then I come in here and I open a new one, and I open up my application, our local storage has persisted, okay? So local storage is important in order to persist data across multiple user sessions. You can go in and read it by using get item, and you can set it by using set item. You can clear it. You can remove an item if you want to. So when would you use a remove item? What do you think? Log out. Yep. That's a pretty good one. Browser cache clear is what the user is going to do. You don't really want to necessarily, in order to have the ability as a developer to clear some browser cache for a user. Log out would be like the best one. Remove a comment. Anytime you want to like delete whatever you had on that, okay, is when you would use remove item. So that's just how you use local storage. I didn't use it well in this case because I had to use a window location reload, which is super lame. We should never have to do that in a single page application. But I'll get to it, and actually I'm going to save this. I'll reshare it with you, and expect an updated working by the end of the evening tonight. And you can check it out. But essentially, the idea is there. Higher order components is the main idea tonight. Local storage is a little bit of an icing on the cake. That's local storage also is not React. This is your browser API. This is the DOM browser API, okay? So this isn't React. This is on every browser, everywhere. All right? And so understanding what local storage does is not a React thing, it's a web developer thing. But higher order components is a React thing, and it's a really great compositional pattern that allows us to extend functionality or make these really cool dynamic components out of it. So that's what we got tonight. I know it's pretty heavy. I hope we walked through it well enough and slow enough to where you start to understand and start to see the patterns that start to emerge. Like I said, you're going to write your own higher order components tonight and tomorrow, but you are not necessarily going to do this all the time when you become a professional, but we will use this all the time when we become professionals. So we will use higher order components all the time, okay? And not even when we become professionals, but like next week or the week after. So that's what we got tonight. I hope this was clear enough and get you started on your journey down this awesome compositional pattern in React. That's it. Have a good night, everyone, and I'll see you later. Good night.